So I want to introduce the first speaker, Abi Vanak. So Abi is an associate professor at Center for Biodiversity and Conservation at Atree in Bangalore. Okay, so Abi and I, we both have a bachelor's in zoology from the same great Loyola College in Chennai. And I know many
About
of you,
20 years apart.
but I don't say that. But so you guys are in engineering school, humanities, but I tell you the culture in a zoology department is all the cool kids will want to go outdoors. And all the uncool kids will stay inside the lab. So all the toppers and all the funny, smart kids go on to do ecology, wildlife biology, and all those funky things. After which you don't get a job. But Abi was one of those cool kids, and he's even more cooler because he managed to get a job. And now he's an associate professor, and he's also got this prestigious Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance Clinical and Public Health Fellowship. He's adjunct research fellow at the School of Life Sciences at University of KwaZulu-Natal at Durban. He's also a teaching faculty at NCBS. So after his BSc in zoology, he went on to do an MSc Wildlife at the very prestigious Wildlife Institute of India at Dehradun. Went on to do his PhD in University of Missouri in Wildlife Sciences. So his research interest has been, movement ecology of very large animals like elephants, African carnivores, and savanna ecosystem, and closer to home, semi-arid savanna grasslands in peninsular India, and adaptation of carnivores in human-dominated landscape. He also has a very holistic sort of research project where he's interested in the concept of one health system, where they talk about zoonotics and virus, humans and animals in sort of close proximity, and dynamics of diseases in these systems, very, very large systems. So especially rabies, which he's going to talk about, and the Kaisanur forest disease. So today he's going to talk about dogs, rabies, and animal welfare, which is a very relevant topic for our campus. So, Abi,
Thank you so much. Thanks, Leslie, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Nice, warming afternoon in Gandhinagar. It's my first time coming to this campus. My parents originally are from Gujarat, but I've been only visiting occasionally over the last few years. Well, we've all had lunch, and I'm going to try and wake you up a little bit with a little game. Okay, we'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, so today I wanted to talk, and I provocatively titled my talk "Misplaced Compassion," and we'll talk about a little bit about dogs, a little bit of rabies, and then I will sort of set some background about animal welfare laws in India, and then we can open up for discussion, and I would love to hear what everybody here has to say, and we'll just, we'll have a good interaction. Okay. How many of you here have seen a rabid dog? Okay, most of you haven't. So isn't that a wonderful thing? Yeah, that you haven't seen one? I'm paraphrasing Peter Matthijssen, who, when asked, have you seen a snow leopard? And you said no. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Right, let's play Rabid or Not. I'm going to show you a series of videos, okay, and then you guess if that animal is rabid or not. Okay? I mean, not this cute puppy. Rabid or not? No. Rabid or not? Yeah, it looks sick, doesn't it? Oh, poor thing. Okay. Rabid or not? Yes, no, maybe, yes. Okay. This one. Rabid or not? Yes. Okay. No. Okay. How about this guy? Not the puppy. This fellow who's got a little bit of a wonky walk. Huh? Yeah. Well, he's going near water also. No? Okay, how about this black Labrador sitting in somebody's car? Very docile. Rabid or not? Mostly people are non-committal. Come on, it's a life and death situation. You need to know. Hello. Okay. Well, yes, you guessed it. All of those animals are actually rabid. Okay? All of them, including the small puppy. Okay? All of those were rabid. All right. So we'll talk about rabies a little bit and what a nasty little disease is it? It is. Okay. It's also a fascinating disease. Okay, and it's caused by this cool little creature. I'm assuming this is the pointer. It doesn't work. Never mind. This virus, the RabV virus. Okay, it's a typical bullet-shaped virus with these protuberances. I mean, this is of course a scanning electron. It's what? No, it doesn't matter. It's okay. No. And so this is the cause of rabies. Okay. It belongs to a little bit of science background here. I'll try and I know it's a mixed audience, so but science is important. So a little bit of science background. It comes from the family Rhabdoviridae. The genus is Lissa virus, and we'll talk about why it's called Lissa a little bit. And it belongs to a lineage of viruses that originated in bats. Okay. And so many other bat viruses, for example, Duvenhage virus, the Lagos bat virus, the Mokola virus, the Australian bat Lissa virus, all of these viruses can also cause rabies-like symptoms. Okay, but the RabV, the rabies virus itself, is the primary one that causes rabies in most mammals and including in humans. Okay, we won't bother about all that stuff. Okay, so what animals are most susceptible to rabies? Things like canids, so dogs, the dog family, mongooses, felids, which are the cat family. Okay, so a lot of these carnivorous animals that are inclined to bite anyway. Okay, so those are most susceptible to rabies. You have a bunch of intermediates, things like skunks, raccoons, bats, and then things like opossums. Opossums are North American marsupial, and then rodents are less susceptible to getting the rabies virus. Okay. How does rabies virus transmit? It transmits via the bite or a scratch from an infected animal. Now, why scratch? Because some saliva may have gone on to the animal's foot, and when that scratches you, then that saliva can potentially transfer. Okay, so it's from infected saliva mostly. Okay, and once it comes into the skin, then it replicates in the muscle and connective tissues. Okay, at the site of the bite. Okay, and then after replication, it enters into the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so then it travels along, and that's what makes this virus unique. This virus is not found in the blood system. Okay, and this is why also getting vaccines on time is very important. And we'll talk about the vaccines as well, and also give you a public service announcement about vaccination. Okay. So it goes into the peripheral nervous system, and then it enters the central nervous system. Okay, and at which point of time you're a goner. There's no cure. Remember, rabies is almost 100% fatal. Once you've got rabies, once it's gone into your nervous system, there's nothing you can do. Okay, you just try and die as peacefully as possible. Okay, and that's what most of the recommended measures are, is to, some rabies patient shows up at a hospital, they just sedate them and keep them calm and try and keep them comfortable. Okay, there are very few known cures or almost no known cures for rabies. There's something called the Milwaukee Protocol, where they put the patient into a coma to stop the brain damage, but there's been like 4 or 5 successful cases ever. Okay, right, so I've already talked about all this stuff. So these negri bodies start appearing in the neuron cells. Okay, those kinds of inclusions inside the neuron, and the virus then replicates in this part of the brain. Okay, and then it travels down into the salivary glands. Okay, and so that's how the virus itself can then propagate to other animals. Now, what it does is very, very interesting. Now, this time frame can go from several weeks of as short as 10 days to 2 weeks to up to a year from the time that you've been bitten or been exposed to the virus. Okay, so people don't even remember being scratched or bitten by an animal, and they end up getting rabies. Okay, because it can sometimes take so long. And because of the kinds of symptoms that rabies seems to engender in humans, there's a lot of these zombie outbreak movies, and that entire genre has been very heavily influenced by rabies. Okay, so this is a spoof, of course. It's not real, but the idea being that a rabies-like outbreak where people are zombies are going about biting and eating people could have resulted. In fact, the movie I Am Legend, have you guys seen it? So that's where they modified a rabies virus to cure cancer, and then that virus sort of became rabid again. So anyway, but in humans it can be really painful. It's a very violent death. It's a very painful death. Okay. The initial symptoms can include nausea, headaches, fever, sore throat, photophobia, which means you don't like to see light, any even slight breeze or those kinds of things can trigger spasms, and which is why when people, for example, if they're shown water, it triggers massive spasms in the throat, and that's why it's called hydrophobia. That means the fear of water. Okay, but they're not afraid of water per se. Even though they want to drink water, it causes spasms, so they can't drink, and it eventually die a fairly painful death. And the encephalitis that the swelling of the brain that results in coma, seizures, and death in 99% of the case. And often patients must be restrained. So it's not pleasant. End of story. Okay. In fact, the word Lissa, the category of viruses that it comes from the Greek word. Comes from the meaning from the Greek word violent. Okay, because they were the rabies. So the dog, like you all saw that violent dog and immediately say, oh yeah, that's most likely rabies, right? Because that's what most people associate with rabies. Okay. Now, again, the term rabies comes from Latin rage, madness, fury. Okay. But actually, some people suggest that might have even Sanskrit origins from Sanskrit rabhasa, to do violence. So it's all very connected with violence. Okay. In fact, in the Sushruta Samhita, which is the ancient surgical text written by Maharishi Sushruta, also it's a very wide period of time when it was written. It contains one of the first written references for describing rabies in great detail. Okay, so it was written somewhere between 1750 to 500 BC, but it has a very accurate description of what rabies looks like in humans. So if the patient becomes exceedingly frightened at the sight or mention of the very name of water, he should be understood to have been afflicted with jalatrisa, okay, hydrophobia, and be deemed to have been doomed. Okay. Of course, then they went on to prescribe lots of cures for rabies, none of which, of course, work. So we'll take that with a pinch of salt. Significantly, though, when Louis Pasteur, he invented or first described the rabies virus, or invented the whole method of vaccination. Okay, by it was very carefully sort of thought out experiments that he did, and finally administered to this young boy who had been bitten by a rabid dog, and that's how the rabies vaccine, the first vaccine, was developed. Okay, so a series of Pasteur institutes were opened all throughout India during the British times, and in fact, India, because of pre-independence India, because of the British garrisons all over the country, was at the forefront of tackling rabies, mainly because for the British, their soldiers were getting afflicted with rabies. They didn't really care about the local population so much, okay, but for them, their soldiers were getting afflicted by rabies. But it became places where, then, of course, a lot of people would come, make long journeys to come to get this vaccine at these pasture institutes, okay. And so India at that time, pre-independence India, was at the forefront of developing these new biologicals and of rabies treatment. Unfortunately, over time, that sort of went down. And you can read a lot of the fascinating history of rabies in this book called Rabid, A Cultural History of the World's Most Diabolical Virus. Is by Bill Wasick and Monica Murphy. And, again, the word diabolical, there's a lot of history there of how things like werewolves and maybe even vampires were inspired by potentially rabid people, okay, or by the disease itself and the symptoms that it presents. So what does rabies look like in India today? How many people, is it important? Have we gotten rid of it? Should we be worried about it? Is it as important as coronavirus that everyone's worried about? How many people do you think get affected by rabies every year? 10, 15, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000? I sound like this is like an auction. No? Okay, well, our current estimates, okay, and these estimates haven't changed much, okay, is that there are about 20,000 human deaths per year of rabies. And we account for more than 30% of the global burden of rabies, okay. And in my opinion, this is an underestimate, okay, because more than 20 million people get bitten by dogs every year. Again, these are all extrapolated from hospital records and so on. So even these could be underestimates, okay. 95% of these cases are from dogs. So what is the, as a public health practitioner, or as a researcher, what should one worry about when thinking about rabies? So let's examine 4 pieces of a puzzle, if you will, okay? When we want to study rabies, or a person like me who's interested in rabies, wants to study and understand rabies, we look at the reservoir host, okay, which in this case is a dog. And if you pay attention, this is a epidemiologist's nightmare. This dog is eating a fruit bat, and you know that bats account for a variety of zoonoses, which means the diseases that transmit from animals to humans, including all of the ones that the world fears the most. Things like Ebola, Marburg, potentially Nipah. That was a few years. There was a scare a few years ago in Kerala, and coronavirus. These are all bat-borne diseases, and bats harbor a huge number of viruses that can potentially affect humans. That's why it's important, paradoxically, to keep populations of bats intact and not let them decline, because the more they decline, the immunity around them goes away, and then there's more potential for those bats to get infected and then pass those infections to other animals. So let's say bats. Dogs, on the other hand. So we'll talk a little bit about the ecology of dogs, because I'm an ecologist, okay, and I've been studying dogs for many years. I love to study dogs; they're fascinating creatures. So we'll talk about the ecology of dogs a little bit. We'll try and understand the epidemiology of the virus itself, of the disease itself, okay, which includes surveillance. And then I won't go in too much into this during this talk, but basically, what are the methods of controlling and preventing human rabies? Okay, there is a lot of talk in the world about how to do this, but we have very effective vaccines for preventing human rabies. So, all right, quick public health announcement: if anybody gets exposed to an animal that you don't know the history of, or in fact any animal, okay, if you get a scratch or a bite, or it happens to lick you, or even on an open wound, then you should go and get a vaccine. You should go and get a rabies vaccine, go through the full course, okay? There is no cure. So it's better to be vigilant, okay? Even if you think it's not a big deal, the first thing you should do is go and wash your hands with, or your whatever part that has been exposed, wash with running water, wash the wound with running water and soap for 15 minutes. 15 minutes is a long time, okay, but set your clock or your watch, okay, and wash it for 15 minutes. That's been known to reduce the virus that goes into the body by more than 70%. Okay, so the first thing you should do is wash with running water and soap for 15 minutes, okay, as soon as it happens. And then go and get a vaccine. And if it's a deep wound or a bite, then you should also get something called immunoglobulin, and that's really expensive, so go to a government clinic. Okay, it's free there. But if you go to a private hospital, it costs you 30,000-40,000 rupees. Okay, so it's really expensive. Sometimes government clinics run out of this stuff, so then you'll have to buy it. All right, but the world has the World Health Organization has a very has an ambitious target of 0 deaths, human deaths by 2030. Okay, we're only 10 years away from that target now, and the main way of achieving that goal is by reducing canine rabies. Okay, by vaccinating dogs, by vaccinating your pet dogs. Okay, so one assumes that our big cities are rabies free. Yeah, we live in, Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar, these are all big cities. Your campus possibly cannot have rabid dogs running around on it, right? Okay, well, I started working with these wonderful group of this NGO in Pune called Rescue. And if anybody's interested in animal welfare and wants to work with animals, these are the people to go to. Maybe you guys can invite them over next time and they'll tell you about what it takes to run an animal welfare organization in a big city. But so I teamed up with them, and they would go out on the road and rescue animals, and people report injured animals or sick animals to them. So I partnered with them. I said, okay, let's start testing these dogs that come to you, okay, either when they're alive or after they've died. Okay, and so we started doing it. This is, I showed them how to get this. This is them taking out a small brain sample from a dead dog. Okay, and then we use these kits to rapidly test for it on the field there. And so you see these double bars here. Okay, here that means that dog was rabid. Okay, if it's just a single one, then it's not. Here you can see a faint line, that means it's rabid. So these kits are very useful for doing a quick field test to find out if an animal is rabid or not. Okay. So then we started looking at this data from, for the last few years, and each red dog that you see is a rabies positive dog that we found in Pune city. It's getting scarier. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of rabid dogs in Pune city, and this is a large metropolis. Okay, it's had a history of people going out and vaccinating dogs. There's lots of animal lovers in the city who go out and vaccinate dogs. There's lots of good NGOs like Rescue who go and do this kind of stuff. Why is there still so much rabies in the city? Okay, in fact, so we tested about 318 suspected cases. More than half of those were positive. We even got 3 bovine cases, that is cows, that were potentially bitten by a rabid dog and also got rabies. And the thing is this, and the interesting thing to note is that we know at least 32 people who were bitten by rabid animals, but thankfully there were no human cases in a city like Pune. And the reason for this is that they have good access to vaccines, to biologicals. Okay, so they can readily go to their nearest clinic will have the vaccine there, right? So they have better education and awareness about these things. So at least in places like Pune city, you don't. So this is a map just showing how that rabies, how the hotspots are in space and time. Okay. So we wanted to also see, okay, we've got rabies in the city, But most of those cases that you saw, those 20,000 cases that you saw, that happens, about 93 to 95% of them happen in villages. All right? That's where the main problem is. It's not in cities. So we went out to the villages and we started catching dogs and we started testing them. And then we also wanted to know how far they moved and how long they traveled. So we started putting these things called GPS collars on them that track their movement. Okay? And so you can see these are all dogs that are, their individual movements are being tracked there. You can see them moving around, doing their own thing. Okay? And you'll notice that there's a group of dogs that barely moves right here in the village, in the middle of the village, where all these other dogs that are in the farmlands around there move a lot more. Okay? See, these guys are barely moving. They're only in the little village. So that tells us that some kinds of dogs, okay, so not all dogs are the same. Some types of dogs are more susceptible or more likely to either get rabies and transmit rabies than other kinds of dogs. Okay, so then we looked at sort of, yeah. It's all dogs. It's all your free-ranging dogs, either owned, unowned, it doesn't matter. They're all free-ranging. Okay, so they're all your mongrel type, the kind that you see outside here. Okay, so you can see that their daily movement rates were much lower in the village than in the farms. So this is the red bar is the village. This is the farm dogs. And their overall home ranges are also much larger in the farms than in the villages. Okay. Now these animals, of course, share the environment with a bunch of other animals. So they have lots of, we have foxes, jackals. Do you guys have foxes and jackals here on campus? No, there's no wildlife group here. They should be, Jackals? Nahi hai? There are, no? Yeah. So we went and caught a bunch of jackals and foxes as well, and we put some GPS collars on them, the same thing that we did with the dogs. Okay, and so here you can see some foxes moving around, and then there's some jackals moving around there. Hey, there they are. Okay, and then we took all of this data, okay, and then we overlaid it with the dog data. Oh, this is also jungle cats. There must be jungle cats here. There's one jungle cat that's walking around in the city. You see that one there? See, he's going to go off in the middle of the city now. It'll be super cool to see a jungle cat in the city, but yeah, one of our college jungle cats did that. And so then we overlaid that with the dog movement. So here, for example, in red is the jackal. Let me just play that again. Okay, so in red is the jackal, and the blue ones are the dogs, and you can see there's a lot of overlap in their movement, okay, which means that potentially they could be interacting, there could be transfer of rabies from jackals to dogs, but more likely from dogs to jackals, okay, and then there's a separate wildlife cycle that may go on, and it might affect dogs once in a while, okay. So you can see, you can put all this data together, and you see these are all different ranges for each of these animals, and this is a cool 3D illustration of the same thing. But you can see basically that these animals are all interacting. They're part of an ecosystem. There's not just, you don't just have, humans and animals are not living separately. They're all interacting very closely with each other. Okay. So with all this data, we now know that the 0 by 2030 target becomes difficult to achieve. Okay. So every year, September 28th, they celebrate World Rabies Day, for instance. But it becomes difficult to achieve these because we don't yet know what we're dealing with. And we're trying to collect some of that data and try and sort of, understand the patterns and the dynamics of rabies spread only now. Okay. But dogs do other things also. They're in their environment, and they also interact with a whole bunch of other animals. So dogs are carnivores. Okay. They can kill larger herbivores. They can have competition with other carnivores, both indirect via food and direct, called interference competition. And there's something called apparent competition, which is where they form disease reservoirs. Okay, so my students and I have been working on this for a while, and we published papers on looking at how dogs can be potentially invasive species in natural environments. Okay. I won't go too much into detail, but basically what we did was we sort of sent out these response interviews to people, and they reported dog attacks on wildlife from all across India that they had observed themselves. Okay, and we found that dogs were known to kill all of these different kinds of mammal species, all of these more than 25 bird species, and about 10 odd reptiles and amphibians. Okay. So what's the big deal? Dogs are killing some animals. Humans are killing more animals, right? As it turns out, most of these attacks were led by packs, and 45% of those attacks led to deaths of those animals. Okay, and most interestingly, 81% of those attacks were by unaccompanied dogs. That means those dogs were not there at the behest of humans. They were not accompanied by people. They were not. People sometimes use dogs for hunting. No, these dogs were hunting by themselves, acting as feral animals. Okay. 36% of those attacks were inside protected areas. That means they were inside the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks that are meant to protect wild animals. Okay, so inside all your famous tiger reserves and all of those places. Okay. We looked at what is the conservation status of most of these, and we found that worryingly there were some critically endangered species that were also being targeted by dogs, as well as endangered and near threatened. So each attack by dogs on some of these species, for example, with the great Indian bustard, have you heard of this bird? You should have. It's going to go extinct very soon. It's almost extinct in Maharashtra now. Gujarat has maybe 5 or 6 left. Rajasthan has maybe 40, 50. Okay, and this photo is taken from Rajasthan. No, this is taken from Gujarat by Devesh. This is a dog chasing off after a bustard. Now, even one bustard individual dying is a huge impact on the population, okay, because they're absolutely critically endangered. Dogs can have impacts on many kinds of endangered animals, okay, and this happens globally, not just in India. All right, so we did some of my colleagues and I looked at all over the world what were the impacts of dogs on threatened species, and we found a pattern very similar to the one we found in India. In fact, we found that around 12 species of animals have been threatened, where dogs are a cause of extinction for those animals. So this is not to be taken lightly. Okay, this is from Nepal, 3 dogs killing a jackal. And then let me see if this video plays. But you see here this pack of dogs attacking a snow leopard, and let me see if this video plays. Yeah. And you can see dogs chasing a snow leopard. This is from China. This is from Tibet. Okay. So even endangered charismatic species like this can be threatened by dogs. Okay. I'm going to skip some of this, but so dogs can also potentially be pathogen reservoirs. We talked about rabies already, but there's a whole bunch of other diseases that dogs can pass to other carnivores, other animals. Okay, and can be a source of epidemics for a whole host of species, from wild dogs, African wild dogs, Ethiopian wolves, and so on. Okay, but now let's get down to our association with these dogs. These dogs are not there by themselves. Okay, they are there as a function of us. So where dogs are affects what kind of impact that they can have on animals. So if they're near villages, they can have certain kinds of impacts. If they're feral and away from villages, okay, then they can have truly large level impacts on wildlife. Okay, for example, in New Zealand, this was half the population of the Kiwis on that island. They were killed by one dog. Okay, so they can have fairly devastating effects, just like other invasive species do. I mean, for example, cane toads in Australia, or the emerald ash borer in the US, okay, or rats in the Galapagos Islands. Cats, another major invasive species in most countries, and responsible for the extinction of many kinds of animals. So dogs are third on that list now. Okay. So let's come to the end of this talk and come to the crux of the problem, right? When we talk about dogs as our best friends, is there a darker side to the relationship? Well, clearly there is. Okay, we've seen some of this now. But there's also a very ancient history of our association with dogs. So this is, I'd gone to Israel a few years ago, and this fossil is the oldest evidence of our human association. This is a woman who was buried along with her pet dog. Okay. Presumably the dog died at the same time as she did. Otherwise it meant a yeah. But we can speculate on that. As you can see here, she's holding it, and they're like, and as we all know, dogs also have been domesticated from wolves. Okay. There are several hypotheses about how this happened. Did wolves domesticate themselves? Did they come closer to humans and scavenge around outside near a village or a settlement, and then the tamer ones got sort of the tamer they became, then the friendlier they became, and their pups got taken in by humans and associated with them more and more. We don't know, but basically there's a long history of that divergence of the dog from the old world clade of wolves. Okay. But there's a lot of controversy about when this happened, where this happened. I won't bore you with those details. All we know is that right now, dogs are the most widely distributed mammal in the world. Wherever humans have gone, we've taken our dogs with us. Okay? And that really close association can manifest itself in really wonderful ways, right? But there's also a dark side to it. For example, I said there's 20 million dog bite cases a year. Okay? And it's not just dog bite cases. There's also direct attacks and killing of children and of even of adults. So even here in Gujarat, people have been killed. There was an old lady that was killed just last month by a pack of dogs in Gujarat. Okay. In fact, the Gujarat High Court, the Ahmedabad High Court has asked the Deputy Commissioner, has asked the government of Gujarat to respond in a case that was filed. Okay. And so this happens on a very regular basis. We compiled all the cases, and we found that just in the last year alone, like in 2019, more than 100 children were directly attacked and killed by dogs. Okay, that's a terrifyingly high number of children to be killed by dogs. Okay, and it's not a nice thing. I mean, we don't expect that kind of relationship with these animals. All right. And in retaliation, then people take things into their own hands. They start going around and killing dogs. Okay, so then you might end up killing the wrong animal, and it just gets out of hand. And then you have urban-based animal welfare activists coming out and comparing dogs to homeless children, and then it just sort of becomes this urban-rural sort of class warfare. So, for example, PETA and my common bugbear, but PETA started a campaign to save dogs in Kerala from being killed. Similarly, the FIAPO, which is the Federation of, what is it? I forget what it's called. But they talked about, authorities of Sitapur were killing dogs, and they urged the government to stop that from happening. There's animal lovers in Uttar Pradesh, the Humane Society of India. In fact, the Ahmedabad chapter of HSI is very active in Ahmedabad in trying to prevent rabies and keep the dog population in control. Okay, but let's just quickly come back to what is the core of this problem. Now, India was one of the few countries in the world, and we were pioneers in this. In 1963, okay, we enacted something called the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Okay, we were one of the first countries. I mean, most developed countries didn't do it, but we enacted this act to treat animals in a more humane manner. Okay, treat them more ethically, make sure that there's no unnecessary suffering, and so on. Okay. Yeah, we'll come to this story. And so under the act, then the government was then under the act held responsible for ensuring that animals don't suffer unnecessarily on roads and in common places. So therefore, the government was supposed to enact a set of rules, okay, to move animals away from roads, so that where there will be no unnecessary suffering. So, for example, and also said that you can destroy stray dogs and stuff like that. It's all in the act. It tells you that you can't use strychnine poisoning for them, okay, but it empowers municipal authorities, for example, to remove stray dogs. It asks the government to give animal welfare NGOs money for setting up shelters where you can keep stray animals, whether they are dogs or pigs or cattle or whatever it is. Okay, but in 2001, our dear, the doyen of animal welfare in India, Maneka Gandhi, who was at that time the Minister for Culture, okay, had this entire animal welfare department shifted to her. So basically, wherever she went, she took the department with her. That's why it's Ministry of Culture. Okay, they enacted these set of rules where they said that basically, if the municipal corporation or the local authority thinks it expedient to control street dog population, it shall be incumbent upon them to sterilize and immunize street dogs, okay, with the participation of animal welfare organizations, private individuals, etc. So that then became the official policy in India, the law for controlling any street animals. Okay, and problematically, what it said, okay, is that these animals, after they've been surgically sterilized, after a necessary period of follow-up, the dogs shall be released at the same place or locality from where they were captured. So if somebody complained about an aggressive dog in their doorstep, then the only thing that the municipal authority could do is have an animal welfare organization come and catch it, sterilize it, and put it back in your doorstep. Okay? By law. You can take livestock like cattle, cows, etc., impound them. In fact, there are rules to prevent them being on streets. But this is the only law in the world that mandates that dogs be on streets. That it invented a category called street dogs, okay, and said, okay, now dogs have to live on streets. And it made it illegal for you to remove dogs from streets. In fact, most people, if you go by the law, most people who adopt puppies from streets are breaking the law because you're not allowed to relocate them. Okay? And by adopting a puppy to your home, you're relocating it from the street. Okay? People can have various interpretations of that, but I'll stick to this one. Okay? We are also the only country in the world where, so they have, under those rules, they have defined furious or dumb rabid dogs, etc. And then it says, okay, you should catch this dog, you should take it to a pound where it will be kept in isolation, okay. Then the suspected rabid dog would be inspected by a veterinary surgeon and a representative from the animal welfare organization, okay. And then here's where it gets really bizarre. If the dog is found to have a high probability of having rabies, it would be isolated till it dies a natural death. You saw those animals out there suffering. You don't want them to die a natural death. You want to euthanize them as soon as possible. Okay? India is the only country in the world that has this kind of a rule for rabid animals. No other country. Okay? So this is bizarre to me. Why would you do that? But we don't have problems with killing animals, surely, right? We kill thousands, if not millions of animals every single day for a whole variety of reasons, okay? For example, the British, who are known to be great animal lovers, and we've inherited many of these animal welfare organizations from them, and those are often supported by the British, will happily kill rodents, large-scale rodents, drive it off an island, or, in Australia, they do these cane-toed culls, okay? Or they'll kill red foxes because they're an invasive species there, okay? Or dingoes for that matter, okay? But when it comes to things like cats and dogs, we have a really special bond with them, okay? So we don't want to see the same kinds of treatments given out to these animals. We don't want to see dogs and cats being killed, right? That's why whenever, you'll see this very commonly in the US, and there's a huge sort of, there's a huge cat lobby and anti-cat lobby, just like in India, we have a dog lobby and anti-dog lobby, okay? So these sort of, clash of within society, and it happens with everything, of course. There's politics in a lot of this, okay? But it sort of makes us question where we are coming from and what is the motivation for some things, and is that motivation rational or not? We try to think of ourselves as rational beings, and so I'm just trying to generate a little bit of a debate here, okay? And I want you to now think about, and I'll end in a minute with a few quotes, okay? But I'll also quickly show you that I love dogs myself. I have 2 dogs, okay? This is Rubble, and I don't have a photo of Rocky, but I have dogs myself, and they're vaccinated and they're kept at home, so they're well taken care of, okay? I'll also just end with acknowledging a whole bunch of co-authors, collaborators, funding institutions, organizations. And then because we are in Gandhinagar and we're in Gujarat, I'm going to leave you with the wise man's quotes, okay? And he himself said this, a roving dog without an owner, and this is 90 years back. He wrote this in Young India, okay? Is a danger to society, and a swarm of them is a menace to its very existence. If you want to keep dogs in towns or villages in a decent manner, no dog should be suffered to wander, okay? But can we take individual charge of these roving dogs? Can we have a pinjra pole for them? If both these things are impossible, then there seems to be no alternative except to kill them, okay? This from the angel of Ahimsa himself. But he also said we offend dogs, against dogs as a class, by suffering them to stray and live on crumbs or leavings from our plate that we throw at them. And we injure our neighbors also by doing so. So he was also strongly of the opinion that if we practice the religion of humanity, we should have a law making it obligatory on those who have dogs to keep them under guard and not allow them to stray, and to make all straying dogs to be liable to be destroyed after a certain date. And this is what most of the world practices. Like if you go to any developed country in the world, this is what they practice. You have licenses for dogs. Okay, if you want to be a pet owner, you have a license. You make sure it's vaccinated. You make sure it's sterilized. You take responsibility because you're taking responsibility for that life. You take full responsibility for it. Okay, and if an unowned dog is found roaming around the street, the municipal corporation come and pick it up, put it in a shelter. If somebody wants to adopt it, they can adopt that dog. If they can't, then there are no-kill shelters where people can then donate money to keep those dogs alive, okay? Or if those shelters don't have the resources, then they euthanize them humanely after a period of time, okay? So I'm going to end here on this controversial note, and we have time for some questions, perhaps? Thank you.